Sports Professor Rick Horrow inside the $1.3 trillion business of sports. You're on the record. CCON Sports Entertainment Innovation, in conjunction with USA Today, brings the best interviews and conference relationships in the business. Today, let's talk a little bit about the frenetic sports schedule. We'll have an abbreviated, on-the-record opening bell, and we'll have an interview with UFC, WWE folks, Lawrence Epstein and Peter Dropick, at a time where not only did they do a panel discussion that I was lucky enough to MC and moderate at the CCON conference number 2 in Las Vegas, but they've had a pretty interesting time with the ESPN deal and also some of their acquisitions. So let's get to it. First of all, quickly on opening drive this week, Disney buys the 10% stake in ESPN. It'll also implicate WWE, UFC. But as far as a stake in the NFL, clearly Disney and ESPN, when the NFL is adding the 3 more games back to the NFL network with Disney and ESPN, and also the idea of the further integration between programming, content, telecast, streaming, this becomes a big deal. Not only short term in 2026 when it opens, but long term as well. So that's number one. Number two, stadium issues all across the country. Chicago Bears and the legislative session in September looking at a 326-acre Arlington Heights property tax break. And in the background, looks at the downtown Soldier Field renovation, which was the top item at $7 billion last year in downtown Chicago. Probably not today. The other hand, the Cleveland Browns looking at a downtown stadium renovation issue, but yet looking at Brook Park in suburban Cleveland that the state of Ohio favors. Cincinnati finishes its stadium deal with Hamilton County on a 2-1 vote. Philadelphia just putting out feelers about what a stadium renovation ought to look like. So the bottom line is stadium issues happening all over the country, and public-private partnerships look like they're ending and beginning. The 20 to 25 year lease period that was done in the late 90s that I was lucky enough to be involved in is now coming up for a renegotiation and a new deal, so you'd expect more of these to happen. That's number two. Number three, the expanded Formula One calendar, $1.34 billion in revenue directly relating to that, a 35% year-over-year increase from the same period in 2024. $6 million lease in Vegas, and a whole host of other reasons have propelled Formula One to the giant that it currently is. Another giant that it currently is the WWE and the UFC, and the two top people as far as the organization is concerned, not only for content but for business affairs and for strategy. Lawrence and Peter are involved in all of this as we look forward to how this is going to happen over time. And when you think about where it's going, UFC, it takes primary responsibility in moving forward. We'll even have some commentary on where we think it is today. Here they are. Sports Professor Rick Horrow, $1.3 trillion business of sports. CCON Sports Innovation, Sports Entertainment Innovation Conference. Over 100 speakers, 500 attendees, revolutionizes the thought leadership business of sports. We go mainstream. We go arguably more business-oriented and more profitable than mainstream. We go a combination of things. But we're talking about extreme. We're talking about wrestling. We're talking about a whole bunch of stuff with UFC and all other aspects of UFC. Lawrence Epstein, Senior Executive VP and Chief Operating Officer, UFC, responsible for all global business operations and managing the company's overall performance and growth. Pretty significant. Can't get any better than that. Elevated UFC to unprecedented growth and popularity. 2010, negotiated the 10% sale of UFC to Abu Dhabi's own Flash Entertainment, and then the largest sale of a sports property in history for more than $4 billion to Endeavor at the time, and it continues to evolve. Lawrence will talk about a little more about the details of the evolution, obviously, as we get into this. Peter Dropick's EVP Event Development and Operations for TKO, responsible for all aspects of staging the full schedule, more than 300 UFC and WWE live events, one of the strongest live event portfolios in sports entertainment in this role. I disagree. There can't be any stronger. That's got to be the biggest. President and CEO Dana White report a report to him. He reports to Dana White. He served as Executive VP, Event Development and Operations for the UFC, May 2024, responsible for strategic planning of UFC's 42-plus annual live events and more. And when you look at some of the stats, we did this panel basically last year and took the liberty of taking some of the stats from last year, and nearly a million television households, 975 plus reached by UFC programming, 40 plus live events, 283 million total followers among UFC total platforms, social platforms, 700 million UFC fans globally across 57 countries measured. I'm not going to continue that because those numbers are outdated, because they're last year's numbers, and anything older than last week's numbers are probably outdated. So let's get to it. First of all, both of you, when mixed martial arts was becoming mainstream and UFC was in its early days of rapid growth mode, how did you envision the sport to grow globally, and is it obviously measured up and exceeded expectations?
Well, first of all, thanks for having us here today. We appreciate it. We're really excited to be part of the entire CCON conference in its second year. Listen, when we bought the company in 2001, we knew this thing had global appeal. We felt like the entree, the understanding of the sport was something that people from all over the world could understand. You know, we always talk about how so many other sports are really difficult to understand, and the entree is difficult. You know, the NFL, for example, huge in the U.S., but if you weren't brought up with it, understanding 4 downs, punt, pass, kick, all this different stuff that happens, it's challenging. Cricket, on the other side, you know, it's a sport I've tried to understand for 20 years now. I still don't get it. The entree is difficult. You really, really got to invest some time, and you really got to be brought up in the tradition of cricket to truly understand and appreciate it. But our sport's easy. You put 2 athletes in an octagon, you let them use any martial art they want. It's easy to understand. The entree is easy to understand. Once you get into it, there's millions of layers of the onion to peel back and to get deeper into it. But because of the fact it was very, very accessible, we always knew this thing had global appeal. The other thing is, and Dana says it best, it doesn't matter, you know, what country you come from, you know, where you live, how you grew up. Everybody understands fighting. It's part of our DNA, and we get it, and we like it. And so there's this sort of part of us as human beings that sort of very quickly identify with combat sports. And so, you know, from day one, we felt like this thing had legs internationally. The question was, how are we going to do it? You know, when we bought the company, I think there was probably less than 12 countries that were broadcasting UFC events. So the game plan was, let's get out there, let's figure out a way to get it out there. And as we sit here today, you alluded to some of these stats on TV in 175 countries and territories, reaching over 1 billion households with UFC content.
1 billion is a pretty good number. It's hard to beat, but this entity is going to beat it. Peter, you know, the cheap joke would be, you were at the Honda Center for so long, so you used to fighting because of the Ducks, and now it was easy to do that. But we're not going to do that. When you made the transition here, did you ever think that it would become what it's become?
No. I think, you know, when I had this, just a bit of background, when I was running events and working for an arena, had the opportunity to bring UFC to California. It was the first one when it was being legalized or sanctioned by the Athletic Commission. And, you know, at the time I sat there and said, you know, I'm hitting my ceiling, but here's a real opportunity. I believed in it, and I knew it was an emerging sport and sports league, but never thought we would be, you know, in this position and in 1 billion households and, you know, doing a fight on the lawn of the White House on the 250th anniversary of our country. So I never envisioned that by all means, but it's been an incredible opportunity to see the growth, not just here domestically, but internationally.
The strategy of aligning public and private stakeholders is easy in other sports. Not easy to implement, but easy to think about. That is the blueprint. How hard is it to generate public support now, both domestically and internationally?
You know, it's a lot easier than it used to be. You know, we took a look at, you know, what I think is sort of the gold standard of sports organizations that partner with governments and tried to learn from what they did, and that's Formula One. They figured out a way to, you know, bring these major events to cities around the world and get, of course, governments to pay them. And in order to do that, they had to create a value proposition. They had to show that what governments were investing in actually delivered for the objectives that those governments had. And so we studied what they had done, and it's all about, as you said in the question, aligning interests. You know, one of the things that we do when we bring an event anywhere in the world is we create significant economic impact. And that economic impact is in the form of people traveling to those cities, those municipalities, those countries to witness our event. Typically, you know, our fans come in for 3 or 4 days. They bring a lot of discretionary income with them. And we've been really, really good at documenting that, hiring experts to help us substantiate all of that. So that's, you know, that's really, really important to sort of aligning interest from an economic standpoint. The second thing that's really important is exposure. So many communities around the world, and this is where Formula One, you know, sort of set the model. So many communities around the world want to get the word out about the great stuff going on in those communities. As I mentioned previously, every single UFC event reaches 1 billion homes around the world, broadcast in 175 plus territories around the world, broadcast in 50 plus languages around the world. So unlike a concert where a lot of people will show up and have a great time, the concert's not broadcast around the world. It's great for the 50,000 people that are coming to watch it at Allegiant Stadium, for example, but our events, sporting events, are broadcast around the world. And the cities and states and countries that host our events are part of the show. We integrate that into the show. So in addition to the economic impact of people coming in, watching the event, we are creating this massive promotional video for the communities that host our events. And that's really, really important to aligning our interests with those of the state actors.
We talked about that off air, so to speak, that the economic impact study is now a template for going to the governments and asking for some investment in some context, either promotional or tax dollars or subsidies or police protection or some other way. And clearly the return is going to be substantially more than that investment. That template is easier to put together now that you've been through it over the last few years?
Yeah, it's, you know, as Lawrence mentioned, we initially hired groups to generate these economic impact studies, and it started right here in Las Vegas. And then, you know, we started commissioning those in different states and then ultimately different countries. So now we have a portfolio of, you know, different markets, different event types, to go out and use those as our, you know, that's our sales pitch. Those are our marketing materials, and the data speaks for itself. We're, you know, on a low end, our fights are generating $25 to $30 million in economic impact, and then the high end, it's $300 million. So those are real dollars, and the return is, you know, at a minimum, you know, probably 10 to 1. And you're seeing, you know, states and countries now understand that a bit of investment is going to go a long ways. So it's not just the economic impact, it's the tax dollars, the direct tax dollars that are coming in, if that's sales tax or through athletic commissions or broadcast tax. It's job creation, you know, 300-400 jobs are created on any given event. And then, you know, all these mom and pop businesses are seeing the benefits from it. It's the restaurants, it's the bars, it's the stores, it's the hotels. So, you know, you put all that on a piece of paper and it gets people's attention. They understand, you know, that we spend a little bit, we're going to get a lot in return. On top of that, it's the exposure, as Lawrence mentioned. If tourism is, you know, a key driver and you want to tell the world that we want, you know, more people to come, then, you know, we're the perfect platform.
And it is interesting that we followed this up before this with a lunch where two of the more dynamic public-private partnership-oriented cities, Vegas and Oklahoma City, have pushed their awareness to the point of everybody realizing who they are, and maybe they didn't as much before. Two different ways of approaching that from a city perspective, and now we have this from the event asset perspective as well. Sprinkle in the element of scarcity/leverage. You know, one of the interesting things about major league mainstream expansion is you have 32, you're going to have two more. You're not going to have five more, you're going to have two more. You guys may be perceived as being able to create as many as you want. Does that impact negatively your sales pitch, or how do you deal with that leverage issue?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you talk about, what creates differentiation, and, in the world that we live in today, there's so much that's become commoditized. You have the same restaurants change. You've got the same retail locations. In the casino business, it used to be only Las Vegas, then it was Atlantic City. Now you have gambling everywhere. You've got the same slot machines. You've got the same FanDuel accounts. So what's the differentiator? Why are people going to come to Las Vegas when all the things that, I just mentioned are present probably within a couple hour, drive for them, if not less? It's events. It's events. It's events. It's events. It's entertainment. And, of course, it's sports. And, that scarcity factor is really, really important. We do 42 UFC events per year. Pete handles all scheduling and all event operations. I don't think he wants to do anymore. So we're probably not going to do much more than...
you mean your leverage is determined by his workload? Is that the way that works?
Pete manages the schedule and the operations. If he's negative on it, we're not going to do it. We might expand a little bit, but the bottom line is we're not going to do 200 UFC events or 100 UFC events. We might expand a bit on the margin, but at the end of the day, 42 events is a very limited amount. Those events are very, very precious, and it gives us an incredible negotiating leverage when we're talking to a state or a tourism authority or a municipality about, hey, we've only got 42. We're going to do a certain number in these markets that we do every year. So there's a precious few. If you want to step up and partner with us on these events, we're going to deliver for you. But it gives us a really, really good negotiating position.
Yeah, just to add to that, if 42 may seem, it's almost one a weekend, but, we're doing, call it 18 of those internationally. So if you're just looking at it from a domestic standpoint, you're almost cutting it in half. And then we do a handful in Vegas, so you take that out of the equation. And the other piece is on the bigger events, but the other piece is we have the Apex facility, which is our own smaller facility, which we started doing closed events in during the pandemic. But we realized, there's massive cost savings, and we keep about one a month there. So all of a sudden, there's not a lot to go around, especially our pay-per-view, our top premium product. So all of a sudden, we're shopping 4 events a year. Yeah. So when you look at it, it's 42. Yeah, it's not a lot, but you really whittle it down, it's only a handful of events that are available. So holding events at Apex we didn't realize the byproduct of that would be that it created more scarcity of events on the road. So it is, only 12 of the 42 are the premium product, which is what obviously everyone wants.
I can see the Vegas Sun Review or whatever it's called now. NBA refuses to expand to Vegas, Adam Silver's workload too great. Kidding? Just kidding, ladies and gentlemen. You got to create some artificial scarcity, and it's not artificial. In your case, it's real. The perspective on your economic impact tails and how you convince government. Look, awareness, we just had the mayor of Oklahoma City talk about what the Thunder Championship meant. We have Steve Hill from the Convention and Visitor Bureau talk about it from here. How do you quantify something that is visceral and inherently difficult to quantify, but yet really important?
Well, there's a lot of data out there that we get from a variety of sources. But, of course, the most obvious, we've got information with respect to television ratings and how many people are viewing our events. But the biggest driver for us when it comes to exposure is social media. And, we're lucky enough to have one of the great innovators in the space, Dana White, at the company, leading us. He's just become this social media juggernaut. And it's not just him. He's put together a network of influencers that will talk about our events, that will promote our events, that will create interest in our events. I mean, take a look at the people that Dana is associating with right now, and I'm only going to grab a few of them, but these are pretty big names. I'll grab one that's very big, the President of the United States, Donald Trump. But then sprinkle on a little Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Meta. Then throw in, all of the celebrities and musicians and athletes that are, part of Dana's network. In addition to these influencers, people like the Nelk Boys that, have connected with young men like nobody else in America and, frankly, around the English-speaking world. You put that all together, and you've got this incredible promotional exposure ecosystem that creates a lot of data, and it shows the value of what we're delivering when the UFC comes to town.
Peter told me off air that the White House cage match will be in the Oval Office. Is that correct?
Yeah, it might be.
Yeah, it might be. He's no. By the way, he's not listening to me anymore. Quite clearly, he's not. So the role of celebrity fighters in your world, not just lining up government and cultural support, but lining up marketing advantages, Duplessis in South Africa and Tapuria in Spain and Georgia, etc. How do the names of these cultural local superstars affect the marketability of this?
Yeah.
Go. Anybody.
Listen, it obviously is a significant asset. I mean, it's interesting, and Dana talks about this all the time. Like, for whatever reason, politicians and leaders in government are interested in the baddest men or women on the planet. They're interested in it for some reason. I mean, when Khabib Nurmagomedov won the title and beat, Conor McGregor, who was the first person that called him? Might not be a name we want to talk about, but it's Vladimir Putin. I mean, so the president of a pretty significant country is very much interested in what was happening with the world of UFC. I mean, we were just in Baku, Azerbaijan. Pete and I were there just a couple of weeks ago, and we had a great event in Baku, which is a beautiful city on the Caspian Sea. And Friday before the event, we were asked to meet with the president of the country. We went by the presidential palace. We had a nice meeting with him. Incredibly interested in Azerbaijani fighters, in the UFC coming to his country, and so there's always been this affinity between government leaders and athletes, in particular combat sports athletes, and it's really been very helpful to us in us growing the business.
Yeah, and specifically to some of these athletes you mentioned, the answer is when they start winning, our phone starts ringing. Yeah. And they see, these athletes, Ilia Topuria, for example. He hangs out with the football stars at Real Madrid. He's as big a star as they are. So, that gets everyone's attention. And so it makes the job easier and harder because, everyone's saying they, bring the fight here, which it's nice to be loved. But, yes, when we have champions from these different countries, it makes it a lot easier. And, the inbound calls are quick after that belt's put on them. And we manage that almost every event.
Broader question, not just public-private partnership piece, but logistics, putting on events as well. Baku's a good example. I know they worked hard to get the Asian Games and some of the other mega sports that make a statement, F1, etc. And I just parenthetically, I don't need to give you my travel schedule, but I spent some time speaking in Tashkent last year, and they're all excited about doing some stuff there too. The question I've got is whether or not those places that are far off from us are harder to fund and put on events because they're not used to the infrastructure, et cetera, or are they easier because they want it badly?
It's probably both. I think when we identify a market that's either an inbound call or we're seeing that's emerging market with athletes or there's a new media deal on coming up, and we want to be there as use it as a marketing tool. We do a full market assessment and determine what is available in the market, what the infrastructure looks like, what the equipment availability is. Do we have to fly stuff in? Do we have to ship it in? And then we do a full assessment to understand how that impacts the P&L, and that's part of. We use that to then go negotiate and say, okay, this event in this country is going to cost $5 million, incremental to a normal event. Right. So that gets factored into the conversation when we're looking for funding. So, yeah, does it help when they're calling us? Absolutely, because they're more motivated. Some markets have very modern arenas and have a ton of production equipment, et cetera, that we need, and you know, it makes it easier, and others don't. So it's just a bit of a give and take, but yeah, it's absolutely something we deal with quite often, including, you know, Azerbaijan and, you know, the Middle East, and, you know, list goes on.
List goes on. A question for the operational guy, just hypothetically. So it's going to cost you $5 million more incrementally, and it's a not dicey, but it's just an unproven venue. But you found, because of government, et cetera, $7 million that you didn't have before. Where is the trade-off between making a little more money and being safe? This is a very important answer from a management perspective. You got to get them to listen to this answer very carefully.
Number one, we're always going to be safe. We're never putting the staff, athletes, fans, et cetera, in harm's way. It doesn't matter how much money it is. That's the short answer. But there's a balance, you know, because a lot of these markets don't have the proper venues. And, you know, we've struggled. A good example is, you know, Brazil's a really, really important market to us. Obviously, from a talent athlete standpoint, from a fan base standpoint, and, you know, it's one of our top markets. They lack quality venues, and the venues they do have are just going downhill. So there's been times we recently, you know, said we're not going to a certain market because the venue's just not meeting our standards anymore. So, you know, it doesn't matter how much money they're going to provide. Now, if the money they're providing helps us put the right measures in place or bring the right equipment in so we're creating a safe environment and the production is to our standards, then of course, you know, it's going to work. But no, it doesn't. We don't just take the money and go.
That's a really important point on the production front, because it doesn't matter where the event's taking place anywhere in the world. We hold ourselves to the same production standards for every single event. So if we can't deliver world-class production level events from wherever we're doing it, that's just a no. I don't care how much anyone pays, because at the end of the day, we have to deliver that high-quality content, and it's got to be consistent across all 42 events.
And I assume you don't want to be the poster child for a country attempting to improve its infrastructure, maybe doing it, maybe not. Parenthetically, this is not a panel on world development of Olympics or not, but aren't we all kind of a little upset that Brazil didn't take advantage of their Olympic opportunity better? Their golf course is in ill repute, and their arenas are terrible, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I'll give you an example. I won't name the country, but you named one of the athletes from the country earlier.
You know, they were trying to pitch us on bringing an event. They don't have the proper arenas, but they said they have a stadium, and they said, you know, if we come, you know, the stadium's open. We don't do outdoor stadiums. They said they'll cover it
with a blanket or what?
A tarp.
Nice. Congratulations.
And
how did you say no immediately, or did you wait?
I asked a little more detail on the tarp just to get a bit of a chuckle.
Fun,
but they were serious, and we said, you know, this tarp probably isn't going to cut it. They were thinking from a weather standpoint. You know, the list goes on, but. Yeah, those are some of the conversations.
But I mean, the good news is in certain markets, you know, we've really been instrumental in helping some of these markets develop high-quality arenas that we ultimately went to. There's a variety of examples I could give you where we worked with local sports organizations, municipalities, et cetera, to help them develop the quality of arena that we'd ultimately do an event there, and we did them.
My comment was going to be that if you look at Oakview or AEG or some of the other entities, you perform even more of a valuable service because you got the major act that will hopefully improve a facility as a consequence of attracting that act.
Yeah, and we do have those conversations in, you know, a lot of, as Lauren said, there are, you know, cities and countries that'll come to us asking us, hey, we're looking at building an arena. If we do build a proper arena, would you come? And we say typically yes. And would you help us design it? We need your expertise. What do we need to put into place from a structure standpoint, production standpoint, technology standpoint, et cetera, so that you would come and others will come. So we don't just look at ourselves, we make it broad enough so that they can attract more business. So that's the best model. But, you know, to say, hey, we'll build this, will you come? that typically doesn't work out.
Well,
It's got to be a long-term.
Yeah.
It's got to be a long-term plan.
And by the way, it doesn't work anywhere. So it's not as if you guys are out front on the mistake. So let's segue from arena development and facility leverage to media, social media, new media as well. Your growth strategy, I assume, is both traditional media, let's call it that, small t for now, and a prolific reliance on social media as well. What's the kind of split?
Yeah, listen, it's all about, an appropriate balance. I mean, clearly, in order to fund your operations, you've got to sell your content. It's the number one source of revenue for us is content sales. So, and that content, those type of revenues generally come from, the typical streamers or, linear broadcast partners that are broadcasting, all sorts of sports content. What's interesting is how you think about the other important revenue sources for us, which are sponsorship partnerships and, of course, ticket sales to events. And how does that interplay with what you're doing with your, sort of traditional media distribution? Because it's all connected. If you're on a broader reach platform, guess what? You're probably going to have better partnership, sponsorship type opportunities than if you are on sort of a subscription, less distributed type platform. So, at the end of the day, these things are all, all connected. But, listen, media is and continues to be for sports the number one source of revenue.
Would you get a sense that as far as media is concerned, the mainstream product doesn't evolve, and there's not, it's a little bit, and there's not this tremendous incremental awareness where a large segment of the population may not have known your sport 5 years ago and know it today. Does that dynamic change the media relationships, the way you approach media, or is that just one of the factors that you look at and you move on?
Yeah, I mean, we're looking for different things depending on where we are in the life cycle of developing our brand in a particular market. I mean, the good news is that, virtually everywhere in the world now, people know what UFC is. That wasn't the case 10, 15, 20 years ago when we were doing media deals. So back in those periods of time, we might have said, you know what, we're interested in taking less money to get on a more broadly distributed platform because we want to expose people to the product. They watch the product. We think the product's great. If they see it, they're going to like it. They're going to become fans. Now as we fast forward to 2025 and we're in the middle of our media rights negotiations right now, the life cycle of the business, particularly in the United States, is very different than it was a generation or so ago. And so our objectives, are different. At the end of the day, as I mentioned, there still is this relationship between broad reach and monetizing other things like sponsorship and partnerships that you've just got to think about as you navigate the world of media. But at the end of the day, it's like everything else in life. It's all about balance.
Yeah, and so you're in the middle of it now. Who's it going to be? How long is it going to be? When are you going to announce it?
Well, I mean, listen, our media rights here in the United States expire at the end of the year, so definitely before January 1st, 2026. I can give you that. We're in the middle of it right now, and, there's a lot of interest, so hopefully we'll have something to talk about in the relatively near future, but certainly before the end of the year.
That's one of the best non-answers I've ever heard from a commissioner-oriented person that I've in life. Excuse me. I'm a public company. We're right. That's really important. In the context of overall strategy at 30,000 feet, it is clear that you look at some of the mainstream sports, and they go back to the old reliables, but they always hold out, let's call it an Amazon or a Google or some piece that will be special, and it'll drive up the rights from the other traditional carriers. Are you mature enough to follow that strategy? Is it even appropriate for us to be discussing negotiating strategy, or how do you approach these negotiations?
Yeah, I mean, just macro, discussion about this. I mean, at the end of the day, like the streaming platforms are in sports already. Amazon obviously has an NFL package. Netflix has done a deal with our sister company, WWE, which has been transformative for their business. And the list goes on and on. I mean, even the ESPNs of the world, which you might think of as a traditional media company with linear broadcast platforms, has ESPN Plus, which of course we helped them build, and now they're launching whatever they're calling it, ESPN direct to consumer. So everybody's sort of in the world of streaming. at some level with respect to sports. And there's a reason for that, because it worked, because sports are special, because just like the stuff we were talking about with respect to why are governments and tourism authorities excited about, paying for these major events to come, it's the same story with respect to the major media companies. Sports continues to work, and Mark Shapiro, our president of TKO, he says it better than anybody. It's like sports rights never get cold. They get hot, they get super hot, they're on fire, but they're never cold.
And sports rights never lends itself to reruns, and it's always appointment TV and all those cliches. The interesting thing I learned from my buddy, Mark Lazarus, way back when, and he learned it from the knee of Dick Ebersol, et cetera, is storytelling, storytelling, storytelling. I assume in your sport people want to see the results, but they also are particularly interested in the characters and the character of these athletes. Yes?
100%. I mean, I mentioned
you're
Dana
not
previously, but we've got the best storyteller in the business and the best promoter in the business with Dana. We also have an incredible production team, led by Craig Borsari, just won another Emmy Award, Sports Emmy Award for our Sphere show. And it is all about storytelling. It's all about, explaining to people, why they should be interested in the personalities and the people behind the actual events themselves. Listen, our product is awesome. You don't have to get into the stories, but having the stories behind the athletes just makes it so much better. And, at the end of the day, that's what gets people to come back time and time again, are these exciting, interesting stories about what lead up to and become an integral part of the sporting events themselves.
I was going to say, it's not just about the athletes, too. I think the brand and the live events, we create stories around those. If you go back, to the pandemic, we created Fight Island, and that was a story in itself. We're going to follow, Fight Island. Was it on a remote island? No, not exactly, but
Is that a secret? Do we not know it's on a
some
remote
people
island?
thought, oh my God, you're taking over a remote island. It's like, that was a story. That was Dana being the promoter.
Right.
And then Lawrence mentioned the Sphere event. We were the first live sporting events to go there, winning awards and Emmys for that. That was it was a must-see moment. We got to see the Sphere event. Probably weren't watching some of the athletes or following some of the athletes. And then we just had the President of the United States announce that we're doing a fight at the White House.
In the Oval Office.
And there's another story. So, there's these moments throughout the company's history where it may not just be about the athlete. Well, that's important, but it's about the evolution of the company, and those are some key moments.
Two more, and for both of you. So, either, and then both. The old days, how do you define the glory days, the old days? You look back and you see not too far long ago when you weren't mainstream. Not only weren't you mainstream, but people didn't want to do anything related to you. And then about maybe 10 years before, you see the Haystack Calhouns and all the stuff that was happening on a regional basis in the old traditional days of wrestling, capital W, small w. Do you see those as different days, different sports, or just kind of an evolution of where the business is now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a natural evolution. I think there were, so many misconceptions, misunderstandings about what UFC, for example, was, who our athletes were as people, what the sport was all about, injury rates, all this different stuff. And so I think, you were living in a world where disinformation was sort of, ruling the day in many places. The sport was banned in certain places. So, it certainly took us a fair amount of time to educate people and rip away and just get rid of all those misconceptions and misunderstandings. But at the end of the day, where we've evolved today is clearly, where we've always dreamed we would be. This deal that we did with the Walt Disney Company and ESPN was a truly transformative moment in the history of the company. We're about to do another, major media deal that will also be, incredibly transformative to our business. But, at the end of the day, as I mentioned previously, all these businesses have life cycles, evolutions. We're at an incredibly interesting point right now, and I keep going back to it. But I mean, who ever thought we would have a fight at the White House? This is just, it's just another milestone that seemed completely incredible and impossible just a few years ago, let alone 20 years ago. And here we are, less than a year away from that happening.
It would have been nice if he informed you about it before he made the announcement, but that's another story. So another story. Your perspective on my question about the old days.
Yeah, Lawrence and I started about the same time, and I think we were doing 11, 12 events, and we were probably 30, 35, employees at the time, and it was, while that's changed to 42 events, global global events, I don't know, 500-ish employees. I don't know the exact number anymore.
About 540.
Okay, yeah, around the world. And, billion households, et cetera. I think from an operation, for how we manage and how we, operate day to day, a lot of it's the same. It's a pretty, while we're part of a public company and there's more layers involved and, we have sister properties, it's, I think, Lawrence would agree. There's a small group and we're pretty nimble, and, it's one of the reasons we're successful and we can move so fast that, decisions are made pretty quickly, and that hasn't changed. The number of people may be involved or the actual people involved, but, Dana's at the helm of it, and there's a group of people around him that can move pretty quick, and that hasn't changed since,
And one thing I'm fearful that if it ever does change, won't be good for us, and that's this chip on our shoulder that we've had from day one. We've gotten to be this big company that's mainstream and all this stuff. We still have that chip on our shoulder. We're still fighting to be talked about alongside the NFL and Major League Baseball and the NHL, et cetera. And we got to keep that chip because that's what drives us every single day.
And that stems from being told no. And the states are saying no. The media companies are saying no. The advertisers are saying no. That's not an answer in our office when we try to do something. If the answer is no, we can't do that, you'll get a death stare from Dana. Like, he'll look right through you, like, that you seriously saying, that's why we're so good at what we can do, and that's why you can create Fight Island. That's why we can figure out how to do an event in the Sphere. That's why we're going to figure out how to do an event at the White House. It's like, that's the mindset. We can pretty much accomplish anything, but that's from being told no.
But I also think one of the side advantages, I guess, of being a public company is your shareholders aren't going to allow you to forget that chip. Right? I mean, hopefully. So you first, and then Lawrence gets the last word. Where's the company, and where are you 10 years from now?
Great question. I mean, I think we continue to, from a live event standpoint, Dana says every day we're going to go everywhere, and we're going to continue chipping away at everywhere. We just did an event in Azerbaijan, and we're just announced an event. We're going to Qatar later in the year. So live events, I think we continue to bring events to all these countries we haven't been to. What that experience looks like, I think will continue to evolve. We'll see a lot more. Is it the Sphere? No. Is it something, inches closer to that? I think there'll be a bit more immersive experience. So the live event experience will be enhanced a bit more. But there's a ton of opportunity to continue to grow the brand around the world.
Last word, Lawrence Epstein.
Yeah, I mean, we have 8 brand maxims for the 8 sides of the octagon at the UFC, and one of them, which I like to talk about a lot, is be first. We love being first. First sport to come back during COVID, first sport to do so many different things, and I think that's what you're going to continue to see out of us 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, is that mantra and delivering, those first experiences. Pete alluded to technology. We've got a relationship with Meta. And you're going to see a lot of firsts in the world of sports when it comes to us leaning in heavily on technology, different types of immersive experiences, both in the live event at the arena, but also as you watch the event from your home. So continue to look for us to be first in a lot of different areas.
Thank you all. We have a special wrap-up comment from Mr. Sean Garrity.
First of all, storytelling's everything. We're very grateful to these 2 amazing individuals, and they don't want the accolades or the recognition, but these are our mentors. This is where CCON comes from. Lawrence, Peter, Jay Vickers. It was inspired that Las Vegas, UNLV, the world wants something like this. So for all of you here, thank you. But the mentorship, the shaping, we aspire to follow the trajectory that you've laid out for us. So very grateful to you, and thank you.
Thank you all for your expertise and vision, and thanks for the panel. See you all next time. Thank you.
What's up? This is Kalle Kizzier. You just listened to Lawrence Epstein and Peter Dropick at CCon 2025, which was held in Las Vegas. That was a really interesting conversation to be at. And I'm going to talk about what's happened since that conversation, which really one of the biggest deals we've seen in sports history, especially combat sports, with the new Paramount deal. So Paramount will become the exclusive U.S. home to all UFC content under a 7-year, $7.7 billion agreement. Starting in 2026, $1.1 billion deal. And the money is huge for sure. And that's a storyline in itself. But what's really even bigger with this is we're going to phase away from the pay-per-view model, which most combat sports have really stayed with the pay-per-view model as long as they could. And Dana has always sworn by the pay-per-view model, no matter how many people have griped about it. And people, including myself, most UFC fans have found an illegal stream at some point. And so reality is, phasing away from that model, it was what they had to do. And that money is huge. You can't stray away from that. So also, I'm going to look at it a little bit this weekend. We got UFC 319. We got Dricus du Plessis and Hamza Chimaev fighting for the middleweight belt. This is going to be a fun fight for sure. I would say, so Hamza is one of the scariest fighters we've seen in a long time. One of the most intimidating fighters. Just running through people, especially. That Robert Whittaker fight was just insane to watch, honestly. But he had trouble staying active. So that will be interesting to see what he looks like in there against the defending champion, Dricus du Plessis, repping South Africa, which has grown the sport exponentially, just having a champion from South Africa. Anytime you get a new champion from a country, it grows the sport into that country. And DDP has done a good job with that. Two very interesting fighters when it comes to styles. I think, again, Dricus is one of those guys that, you on paper think he should be losing, and then he just keeps on winning. Like with that Israel Adesanya fight. Izzy is one of the best kickboxers of all time, and throughout most of that fight, Izzy looked like one of the best kickboxers of all time. He was outstriking him, and then, the ties turned real quickly, and Dricus had a rear naked choke. The fight was over, and I think Dricus really showed that he is a real legit champion in that second Sean Strickland fight. First one was a close fight, but the second one he just dominated. So Dricus is legit, but he's going up against someone who is he's a scary guy, Hamza, for sure. His wrestling, be interesting to see if he can withstand the onslaught that'll likely come early, and if Dricus can drag it to the championship rounds, I think it could be very interesting. It could go either way if he can survive that initial onslaught, because Hamza's going to come out fast and hard, just shooting takedowns, going to try to end it early. But Dricus is a strong guy too, so that's good. That's going to be a good fight. I think on my objectively, I would say Hamza should win this, but Dricus keeps going against the status quo, so I'm not sure who to take in that. Also got some interesting other fights on that card. Michael Venom Page and Jared Cannonier. Venom Page is, if you like anyone with a karate background, that's the guy to watch. I think he's a very exciting fighter. Cannonier, that's interesting too. Cannonier's a big guy. So Venom Page going up and fighting 185 will be very interesting to see if strength difference will play a role there. I think that's kind of that matchup is a strength versus speed kind of situation. So I'll be interested to see who comes out on top there. You got Jeff Neal versus Carlos Prates. That's a good one. Kai Asakura. Kai Asakura, he came from Japan and fought right away for the belt in the flyweight division against Pantoja. Didn't go his way. Pantoja he's going down as one of the all-time greats. So It'll be interesting to see if Kai Sakura can get a win in the UFC here against Tim Elliott. And we also got Edson Barbosa. Any fight fans, they see Barbosa on there. That's gonna be fun to watch. So yeah, I mean that's a little bit from what I've seen from this weekend from UFC 319. Again, the title fight, I'm really looking forward to that, and seeing if Hamzat really is what everyone's saying he is. He did look like that against Whitaker, but at the same time, against like Kamaru Usman, he did look beatable. So, and we go back to Gilbert Burns' fight. He seems to be getting better with every fight though. So Dricus is going to have his hands full. But again, if he can get it to the 4th and 5th rounds, we'll see if Hamzat's gas tank can last that long. And again, this is coming off the news of the Paramount deal, which will not start this weekend. It starts in 2026. But yeah, it's it's going. The UFC is one of the most fastest growing. I mean, MMA is one of the fastest growing sports in the world, and UFC is one of the most profitable promotions ever. Other news when it comes to UFC, people noticed that Conor McGregor was removed from the official UFC roster. Who knows what that exactly means? I mean, anyone who's been paying attention knows that it's unlikely we see Conor back in the ring anyways, but I guess it is notable that he was removed from the roster. So we'll see what happens after that. See if there's anything else to talk about. I mean, there's plenty more, but that's a little bit of update on the UFC and MMA since we've had that conversation with Dropick and Epstein. I'm looking forward to UFC 319.
Well, certainly some perspective about the UFC and WWE and long-term monopoly of an incredible sport that was questioning its mainstream existence just a few years ago, but not now. So let's look at 3 to watch this week, consistent with the opening of the NFL and college football right down the pipe. Number 1, Paramount and Skydance finally seal their $8 billion media merger. They finally agreed to it. New leadership team features David Ellison and chairman and CEO, and Jeff Shell as president, and the merger received strong media scrutiny due to the FCC's approval. We'll see how it all shakes out down the road. And of course, one of the big issues is streaming with major networks. So when Peacock and NBC look at all this, the ESPN media deal with Disney, we have Fox and their situation. All of this couldn't have been predicted years ago, but is the mainstream now, quite clearly. Number 1. Number 2 to look at, Genius Sports files the record-breaking Q2 performance, $118.7 million in revenue, 24% year-over-year increase, and a $34.2 million EBITDA. It increased beyond anybody's expectations. The new multi-year deal with the NFL through 2030, Italy's Serie A, the European strong deal that they've done, and Genius Sports obviously here to stay with the merger of AI as well as other forms of entertainment. We've got to be able to look at that as it relates to all of these leagues down the road. And then number 3, the next coach that falls in line, Joe Mazzulla, confirms a multi-year extension. The president of the team, Brad Stevens, talks about his strong record, 182-64, 33-17 playoff mark, his 2024 NBA championship, and with Jason Tatum's injury and the questionable free agent market, you've got to be consistent with a coach, and that's exactly what's happened with Joe Mazzulla. So as we go forward in beginning of the season for the NFL, kickoff with college, and everything else that's happening, let's understand that these are big issues to deal with from the business, marketing, legal, administrative aspect. Well, that's our show for today. We'd like to thank Kalle Kizzier for his commentary and his perspective in putting the show together. I'd like to thank Lawrence Epstein and Peter Dropick to give us some UFC, WWE perspective. I'd like to thank you all for joining us for the $1.3 trillion business of sports. On behalf of CCON, Sports Entertainment Innovation, and USA Today, who made all of that possible, as far as the conference itself and the panel that we brought to you for the podcast, Sports Professor Rick Horrow, inside that $1.3 trillion business. Speak with you soon.